If you're in your 20s or your 30s right now, you would be forgiven if you read certain newspapers and listen to certain commentators for thinking that you are the worst person on the planet. You're unbelievably lazy, you're uniquely entitled, and everything that's going wrong with the world is your fault. You're not trying hard enough, you're not working hard enough, you're complaining too much. You are the issue, right? And I'm not inventing this. Let's just look at some typical Daily Mail headlines from the past year or so. Millennials are entitled, narcissistic, and lazy. They all want cushy jobs. Lord Sugar claims youngsters don't have hunger for hard work and prefer to sit on beanbags and flick elastic bands at each other. That was not my experience of being in Lord Sugar's boardroom, but that's a story for another day.
Sean, it is with regret that you're fired.
Thank you, Lord Sugar. Gen X's brutal response to young workers complaining about waking up and going to work each day. Just shut up, because we're paying for everything. Are Gen Z lazy? Boomer argues they've been mollycoddled. Gen Z think they can do nothing and get benefits. Bring back national service. Pensioners slam lazy and entitled work-shy youngsters who moan that they can't get jobs because COVID left them without social skills. Here's why so many young people are eschewing adult life for an adolescence that stretches into their 30s. A generation with a huge sense of entitlement. Bosses claim that millennials are spoiled, full of themselves, and adverse to hard work. Now look, I've been thinking about making this video for a while, despite the fact that to the majority of people it's going to be fairly unpopular, but I think that somebody needs to plant a flag in the ground and call out the nonsense that is this pervasive lie that an entire generation of people seem to believe, due to a small handful of newspapers and media commentators, that this entire generation, or in fact 2 generations, right? Because millennials and Gen Z in all of this news coverage seem to be used and picked upon interchangeably, that there are millions of young people spanning the ages of like 16 to 35 who are somehow lazy and entitled and don't want to get ahead in life and expect everything on a plate. Now, if you're in your 20s or your 30s and you think about your lived experience and you look at the people around you and everybody you went to school with and the people you went to university with and your colleagues at work and your friends, can you think of a single person who is lazy and entitled and sits around all day and is handed benefits as some of these headlines claim? Or can you think of dozens and dozens of people in your life, in your own experience, who are doing absolutely everything they can to progress and get ahead and work on themselves and build their careers and save money to do things like buy a house, which is very difficult these days, and yet only 1 generation ago was far more in reach? Because in my opinion, this issue goes far, far deeper than a handful of newspapers picking on young people to get clicks. To me, that's not the real issue. The real issue here is that if this lie takes shape, if young people who are already struggling in so many ways begin to believe that in fact every generation up until then was different and what they consider hard work is actually just being mollycoddled, if they begin to believe that despite their best efforts they're not trying hard enough and they're not going to get anywhere and that they're too entitled and that they should just shut up, where does that leave an entire generation of young people? And indeed, where does that leave the whole of society? Because let me remind you, if an entire generation of young people feel lost and adrift, it's not just young people that lose, it's the whole of society, right? These people are the future leaders. These people are the future doctors and nurses and carers and politicians and business people. And this entire generation is also the people whose taxes are going to be paying for the pensions of the people who are currently saying they're too lazy to work, right? But it gets deeper. And I think the point gets more important, because let's just look at some of the facts of the reality of being a young person in the UK today. So 89% of young people in Britain report that they believe that their life lacks purpose and meaning. 9 out of every 10 people think that their life lacks purpose. 57% of young people say that they have lowered their long-term aspirations in life over the past 2 years due to things like the cost of living crisis. Young people are proactively curtailing and limiting their future before that future even arrives. They're being told that they're not trying hard enough. They're being told that they can't do it, and so guess what? They're choosing not to do it. 1 in 4 young people report having experienced a mental health problem in their lifetime, with 1 in 5 claiming that their mental health has got worse over the past 2 years. 55% of young people report feeling lonely at least some of the time, with 1 in 10 claiming that they are lonely often or always. And then these key milestones of adulthood that 1 or 2 generations ago were taken almost for granted, that were far more in reach, like home ownership, are suddenly for this generation far less in reach. So in 2022, the average full-time worker could expect to pay 8.2 times their earnings to get onto the property ladder. That number has almost doubled over the past 25 years in real terms, pound for pound, which means that it is now twice as hard to get on the property ladder. It is now twice as hard to unlock one of those key milestones of adulthood that this generation is accused of choosing to skip, right? Stuck in adolescence, deciding not to progress, living with their parents, having it easy. The average young person today on average full-time earnings has to work and save for twice as long, or live with their parents for twice as long, or battle the rental market for twice as long on average compared to 25 years ago just to get on the property ladder. Now, to me, that doesn't strike me as a generation of people who are lazy and working less hard. It strikes me as a generation of people who are working harder for longer to get things that were once by so many people considered basic and within reach. And so when you add all of this together, I think it's fairly easy to make the case that this generation of young people are experiencing a collection of problems that's more complicated, more multifaceted, and more pervasive than arguably any generation in recent times. And yet when this generation needs advice, they find silence. When this generation needs encouragement, they find ridicule. And when they do turn to people for actionable ideas on how to get ahead in life, all they find is malevolent actors and weirdos on the internet who float to the top with this terrible advice because there is a void being left in the mainstream. The mainstream is pushing young people so far from the center, so far from the point of acceptance, so far from the encouragement and the guidance that they need, right? That guidance has been lost. And so the danger here is that an entire generation of young people, this generation, our generation, are stagnating at the most important time in our lives. This decade or so, between say 21 and 31, where you're expected to make all of the key decisions in your life, where you're expected to create solid foundations upon which the rest of your life will be built, whether that is a relationship, whether that's a family, whether that's buying a home, building a career, understanding who you are as a person, finding your place in the world, creating meaning in your life. All of these things are becoming harder to obtain. And in your pursuit to obtain them, you're being told that you're not working hard enough. And because of that point that I made at the beginning of this video, that is not the lived experience of anybody in this generation, right? And we don't know anybody lazy. We don't know anybody who's work shy. We don't know anybody who's entitled or narcissistic or any of these words that are thrown around. But the danger is that so many in this generation are going to begin to believe it. And I think that the worst thing that you can have personally in your life at this point in life, when you have time on your side, is this kind of apathy, is to resign to the idea that actually, yeah, maybe you're not going to make it. Because I think that this lattice work of pressures and problems is actually one of the most significant, yet one of the most overlooked issues that we face as a society today. Nobody wants to talk about it, but there are millions of people living with it and millions more being persuaded by the idea for cheap clicks that the generation below them aren't trying. It's an us and them mentality. And so I guess what I'm trying to say with this video is, in the next year of producing content on this channel, as I lean more into the core themes that I find interesting, I want to do two things. Number one, I want to continue to share the life lessons I wish I knew sooner in my 20s, because I want to hopefully hand down some actionable insights and advice from the past decade of my life as I slowly move towards 30 this time next year. I want to just hand back the lessons I wish I knew sooner, because if I knew those lessons sooner, my 20s would be far less miserable, would be far more productive, and I'd get far more done. But number two, and this part's new, I'd quite like to continue to beat the drum for this generation, in the sense that there is so much noise from legacy media. There is so much noise from established voices. You just need to click on a newspaper website or look at the newsstand in the supermarket or turn on the chat shows on daytime TV, and you're going to be told time and time again that you are the issue, that you're not working hard enough, that you're lazy, and that you personify everything that's wrong with the world. And obviously that's not true. Obviously your daily actions disprove that. Your ambition and drive disprove that. The fact that you're this far into this video, frankly, disproves that. And so I'd like to just continue to highlight those cases, right? The stats that we just spoke about, the people who are going out there and doing incredible things despite all of the pressures and challenges that this generation faces that the previous did not. Somebody needs to speak out about the nonsense that is this myth. It's a myth, it's an invented myth by newspapers and commentators that this generation's lazy, that this generation isn't trying hard enough. And I think that the most dangerous thing that could possibly happen to this generation is that enough of us begin to believe it, that we stop trying, that we park our ambitions, that we scale back our futures before those futures arrive. So there'll be a normal video next week, but in the meantime, think of this as a slight turning point in this content for me to hopefully lean more into the idea that the young people are lazy and everything that's wrong with the world myth is silly, and I hope to continue with this content to hand you actionable ideas to overcome that yourself, but also to disprove that more broadly for everybody to see. See you next week.